to start things off, Reverend Dr. DeWayne Davis, can you start us off with a prayer or a blessing right off the bat?
Thank you, Jasper. Thank all of you for joining this call. I know you have a lot on your plate, but thank you for joining in this meet and greet. Thank you for the questions you've sent, and I look forward to our conversation. I'm going to just start with the blessing. I want to be very honest with you. I tend to write my own prayers and blessings. However, when I sat down to do that, it feels very self-serving. So I'm going to be using other blessings because I don't want to be so self-regarding or even so imposing. So I want to read something from the Jewish poet Alden Solovey, which I think will be a great blessing, and I think it'll touch both of us in terms of our conversation tonight. And Alden Solovey writes, "All I am, all I have, all I'll become are present in this moment. Warmth and breath, love and compassion, silence and celebration, everything here, all gifts present. What then, God of all being? What then of my own choices? What will I make of the space between this breath and the next? Will I bring laughter and light, hope and faith, wonder and strength? Will I stand in humble service for all of my siblings? Maker of heaven and earth, grant us the wisdom to choose lives of grace, lives of vision and understanding, seeing each moment as a choice, to bless our companions with strength and wisdom, with honor and respect. Blessed are the gentle moments of grace." And that is my hope for us and this conversation, and for you, moments of grace. Thank you.
Thank you, DeWayne. One last time, I'm going to bring up the muting, so just keep that in mind as we go through it. One more thing I didn't talk about before is the chat bar. So in the chat bar where the comments are, I'm also going to put the questions on that chat bar that I will be, as I pass them out, so you can kind of see and reference back to kind of what the question is and what he's referencing to. So keep that in mind. And then again, if you had any questions or anything in particular that you want to put in the comment or the chat bar as well, you can put that there, and those will be referenced and taken into consideration, and we'll just and put along with other questions and things and passed along to DeWayne, so we can kind of look at some of that at a later date as we're working through this information. So DeWayne, are we ready to go?
Yes, ready when you are.
All right, so the first question right off the bat, so please talk to us about your time in the public sector and how it relates to your church ideology.
That's a very good question. I'll give you the context of public service. When I left home for college, I left church. I didn't think church was going to be a part of my life. And then when I was thinking about what I wanted to do with my life in terms of profession, I eventually started, leaning toward politics, the public sector in some sort. And my first job out of college was working for a member of Congress, Pete Visclosky from Indiana. I was very young and, didn't know exactly what was going to be my life. But what soon became clear to me is that based upon my own background in economics and public policy, all of the issues I tended to work on were human needs issues. And so what people don't know is that when you start working on Capitol Hill, the first job you get pretty much starts setting in place what you're going to be working on. And so the first thing that I worked on was President Bill Clinton's Health Security Act. That was the first piece of legislation I was supposed to analyze for the member. And it just sort of went off from there, that everything that I was going to be doing was going to be around healthcare, housing, the social safety net, social security, income inequality, civil rights. All of those became the things that became part of my portfolio. And what they were all about was trying to help people in some kind of way. Now, I didn't think much about it until much later, but it started to occur to me that what I was doing was in some ways an extension of what my parents had taught me. My parents, my father, who was a minister of two churches, and my mother, who was a missionary, their whole life was about service. And that they didn't make a distinction between their jobs or a home. So I remember as early age where my mother would go into the cupboard in the refrigerator and fill bags of food and give it to someone. And I didn't realize the impact of that until I started working. And so that influence on me was that, I had to leverage not only my privilege and what I was doing to help others, but that the focus of my work would have to be attention to the very real material needs of people. And as I began to do that work, it became clear to me that that's exactly what we should be doing, that the government should be in the business of promoting the general welfare, looking out for people. And so I used my work to do that, to really place a focus on how do we leverage the power, influence, and wealth, yes, the wealth of the government, to take care of the most vulnerable people around us. The government can do it. It has the money to do it. And I knew that. When I began to transition into ministry, I was very much concerned. I had spent all of my life in government, and I had a little bit of trouble trying to figure out how going into ministry would work with my background. What use was my background if I was going into ministry, is what I used to say when I was going through that period. But when I was in seminary and began to immerse myself anew into biblical studies and biblical interpretation, early church history, it confirmed for me something very powerful, that if you really pay attention to both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, the one thing that becomes very clear is that the biblical witness and church history is replete with a real concern about human needs, about people's material conditions. We've tended in recent age to spiritualize everything that's in there. I mean, over spiritualize it. But look, the Hebrew Bible places a premium on faith, the faithful being attentive to the needs and economic security of the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. Is very clear about that, very intent. The prophets complain over and over again about not taking care of the people who are in need. The historical Jesus did not spiritualize his encounters with people. No, he talked to people who were poor, who needed to be healed, who needed something to deal with their bodies. And so when I started to go into ministry, it became concerned. I don't want to spiritualize this experience. Don't get me wrong. There's great moments for that spiritual nurturing that we do in the spiritual discipline. But I really don't want to get into the place where we're so spiritualizing everything that we tend to overlook and justify poverty or deprivation or the things that the real material needs of people. So that's how I connect what I did to what I do now, that my concern has to be for what's really going on in the lives of people, especially vulnerable people.
Thank you, DeWayne. All right, you ready? Next question.
Yes.
In a different area, collaboration is an important aspect of the ministerial model and the work that occurs with lay leaders within the church. What is your vision for leadership collaboration among both ministerial staff and lay leaders at Plymouth?
So that's an interesting question too, because I know the dangers of clericalism, and I know also the dangers in my own work of power and leadership. but what I have been very fortunate, both in my previous job experience and in my work in the church, to always be in collaborative settings. A lot of people don't know about the work of the public policy work on Capitol Hill, which is where my early training came. You really can't do the work you do in that capacity without working very closely in teams. There's too much to do, so you can't do anything by yourself. Anyone who wants to go it alone is going to find themselves not only burned out, but probably not trusted. And so I was fortunate enough to learn that very early on about the power of division of labor and collaboration. When I went into ministry, the first church-related job that I got was policy analyst for the Episcopal Church and for the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church. And the beauty of that work is all of the mainline Protestant denominations have offices in Washington, D.C., and the Catholic Church has an office in Washington, D.C., and the Jewish faith has several. And none of the work that we did happened in isolation. We all worked very closely together in terms of the work we did. So in essence, both in my previous job and my work in the church, it's always been a collaboration model. But here's another thing that I want to really say to you, because I think it's very important too. When I went into ministry, one of the things that I wanted to do, especially in seminary, I went looking for, where is this warrant or this understanding about what a quote, a pastor does? And let me be honest with you, it's nowhere in the Bible. Except for a few little places. And I think the one where a pastor is actually, even in the Greek, is written out, is in the letter to the Ephesians. And even that one is very powerful because it says, I think that letter, it says that, some people, the gifts that we were given were some to be apostles, some to be pastors, some to be teachers. And then we were given that gift to equip the saints for the work of ministry. Now, what is very powerful about that is nobody is doing anything on their own. And so even the people that have titles, their jobs are not for the sake of having a job or to run everything. Their jobs are actually to help other people find out their ministry. So I took that to heart. And when I went into pastoral ministry, it was very clear to me that if there's anything that I must do, it is that I must be looking out for the ways that people can discern what it is theirs to do. I think every person has a unique call that is placed on them. Everyone is called to do something. And it would be the height of dereliction of duty and malpractice if I insist myself upon others and interfere with the exercise of their call and their responsibilities to ministry. And so what that means is when I walk into a setting, I am already very mindful that everybody else in that setting too is a minister. Even at All God's Children, my call was to say, you know what, I don't like the word volunteer. And I would say that is your ministry or you're a minister. Now, a lot of people took issue with it. They did not want to be called ministers. But what I was trying to emphasize to people was that when you accept that call and that responsibility to participate, then that's what you are. And it is my job to equip you, to help you discern what it is that you are best, chosen and called to do. And that's exactly what I did at All God's Children. In my first year, I brought in a church specialist and a facilitator to help us restructure our operations such that we would develop a strategic plan and some strategic initiatives. And it wouldn't be me doing that. It would be empowering ministers and volunteers to take responsibility for those strategic initiatives. And that's what I believe collaboration is all about. I'll give you another example. I know I'm going long, but I'll give you another example. That's also why I always loved the Jesus and the disciples in the Gospels, because they look to me like just a ragtag bunch of losers. And every time they wanted to sort of slough off what they needed to do, Jesus would say, no, you do it. You go ahead. You are empowered to do it. And so I just am very mindful, and I don't ever want to be the one that interferes with someone exercising what they have been called to do or the ministry that they want to be a part of. And that goes from the clergy staff and the staff or the other staff people and the volunteers and the people who show up to participate in whatever capacity.
Thank you, DeWayne. Next question. So while Plymouth honors freedom at the pulpit, what boundaries or limits do you keep around politics or partisanship in the pulpit? So one more time, while Plymouth honors freedom in the pulpit, what boundaries or limits do you keep around politics or partisanship in the pulpit?
So that's an interesting question, and I thought a lot about it, and I'll answer the question about boundaries I place on myself by answering the difference between what I think politics or partisanship, because they're very different. The distinction between politics and partisanship. Now, when we say politics, we mean sort of what guiding and influencing public policy. That is, the exercise of trying to influence policy or guiding policy. What you are likely to hear from me and from the pulpit is a challenge to our government to address injustice, inequality, oppression, and exploitation. And by the way, regardless of what you think about the Bible or you think about Jesus or whatever, anytime a government has within its power to influence or be responsible for the very real material condition of people, I think it's incumbent on the people of faith to challenge that government. So if that's political, I stand charged. But it won't be partisan. I carry no water for any party or for any politician as a part of my role as a proclaimer of the gospel or a leader of God's people. I don't care who's in power. If you are not tending to justice, if you are not addressing inequality and oppression, if you are not taking care of the most vulnerable, if you are not tending to the needs of the widow, the orphan, or the stranger, it is incumbent upon me to challenge that and to speak and stand in solidarity with the most vulnerable among us. But again, I won't carry water. I won't be promoting any party. I won't be vouching for any party. And while I have a personal partisan affiliation, my role as preacher of the gospel is to help, to discern with all my might, to discern what thus says the Lord. And while I cannot be sure what God may be saying or to you personally or to the others, I can guarantee you that what God isn't saying, and God isn't saying anything about the Democratic or the Republican Party. And so I'm not going to say anything about the Democratic or the Republican Party. But I am going to say something about what happens to people. Now, let me be very clear. I want to go a little bit deeper about what I mean by this. I do advocate for us to be a public church in the public square. And now, what that doesn't mean, I'm telling you what that doesn't mean first. That doesn't mean that I want to use Christian symbols and images and icons to wave around and tell you how Christian I am. I'm not interested in claiming that the U.S. is a Christian nation, and I'm not interested in trying to use the church to take over government. I don't care about that. I'm not interested in saving anybody's soul because I don't think I can do that. I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in taking control of government so I can make sure it's a theocracy that favors me. I'm talking about a public church, a church that engages politics as an institution, bearing witness to an alternative ordering of society that reflects grace and justice and liberation for all people, that tries to remind people in power that our responsibility is one to another, that when someone is hurting and someone is crying out for justice, crying out for help, we have a responsibility to do something. And here it is that we are the ones as a church are bearing witness to that there is something loftier and more important than money or power. So that's the kind of church I want to be a part of, that says there's something more important than how much money we give the military. There's something more important than more tax cuts for the. There are things that people need that we should be tending to, and so to the extent that you hear that and you call it political, okay. But I can assure you that I have no interest in carrying water for a politician or a party, because I don't think that that's the witness we've been called to.
Thank you, DeWayne. All right, next question. One more quick reminder for everybody too. I should tell you that feel free to keep your cameras on, and also a couple of you make sure that you're staying muted. So on to the next question. Given your faith is rooted in the Christian tradition, to what extent do you believe Plymouth should place an emphasis on Jesus? What role does Jesus play in your teachings and your message to the congregation?
So there's a quote from, and I hope I get it right, Harry Emerson Fosdick, the great preacher, which resonates with me all the time. He said, the world has tried to get rid of Jesus, first by crucifying him, and second by worshiping him. And what he meant by that is that sometimes the Christian church can get so involved in worship and sacramental adoration of Jesus that we get distracted from paying attention to Jesus's moral insights and ethical demands, especially when it comes to justice and poverty. There are people who will be. There's some Christians, and don't get upset with me when I say this, but there's some Christians who would much rather worship and praise Jesus than to follow Jesus' command to feed the hungry. And in some ways, I think it's easier for people to do that. And so while my Christology is mid to low, and while I am reluctant to refer to myself as a Christian, you probably won't hear me say that often. And not because the word doesn't have any meaning. I'm not one of those people who are saying that, oh, if they're called it, I don't want to be called it. No. I am reluctant to call myself Christian because Jesus didn't call himself that. And very few of the early church people did. So there's something about it that tends to unnerve. But I am uneasy when worship of Jesus becomes a justification for not tending to issues of justice. It's too easy. I think it's become way too easy to use the post-Easter Christ of faith to justify all kinds of creedal and dogmatic absolutes. People, here's the thing. Sometimes when I see my evangelical friends preaching and proclaiming, they spend a lot of time avoiding the Gospels and at least the parts of it that aren't related to the crucifixion or to the birth. Because I suspect that there are some things in there that aren't uncomfortable. Luke 4 is very uncomfortable. Jesus basically said, get rid of all debt. As Jesus, like, get rid of it. Don't have debt. Get rid of, all the things that, basically forgive everybody what they owe. Boy, you're going to get in trouble. You start preaching that message. My idea is that I'm a learner and follower of Jesus, less so the idea of a worshiper. Don't get me wrong. I think Jesus is certainly to be exalted in many ways. But I think that's because Jesus earned that exaltation as one who bore witness to liberation and equality and justice to the extent that they had to kill him for it. And so in some ways he's earned his exaltation, but I'm a little uneasy with worship in the way that the church has done it, because I think it might lead us away from what I think were some of the most enduring wisdom of Jesus's ministry. And so I do not see it as my role, nor it is my intention to get Plymouth to place emphasis on Jesus. Rather, I see it as my role to proclaim the good news of love, inclusion, and liberation. My role is to help us imagine how it is that we can embody the moral insights and ethical demands and enduring wisdom that Jesus embodied. How do we make our witness an alternative ordering of the society where we can begin to imagine what it would be like to include people who've been excluded, where we begin to see each other through the eyes of love in a real way, not that emotional stuff. I'm talking about that action stuff, where the injustice that prevails becomes so anathema that we cannot do anything but act and try to change it, try to do something. That's what I want to do. When I go into that pulpit, I want you to be so just overwhelmed by imagination that you won't be satisfied to see injustice and not act. That you will be so unsatisfied with the status quo that you will seek to find a way to change it. That's what I hope I do for you. And I think Jesus is a wonderful way to help us do that, because his imagination was both expansive and dangerous. And boy, now that's what I do want. I want us to be dangerous to the status quo. I want us to be dangerous to the prevailing injustice. I want us to be so motivated that politicians and governments will want to know, what must we do to be on the right side of the question? And so that's what I hope my appeal to Jesus does. I'm not interested in saving anybody's soul. I'm not interested in spiritualizing that ministry. And I'm certainly not interested in getting people to call themselves Christians. I care less what you call yourself than what I see you doing for the cause of justice.
Thank you, DeWayne. All right. I want to make sure to get this worded right. Although you were not at the church during the time of the initial embroideries conversations, that conflict within the church has had an emotional impact on the congregation. How do you deal with conflict?
Um, so one of the things I want to distinguish right away, uh, because I learned it when I got to Minnesota. Um, there were some who I'll be honest with you. I speak directly. Uh, when there is an issue or a question on the table, I am loath not to shrink from it. Uh, my life is not lived with trying to ignore elephants in rooms. Um, but what I always want people to understand is there is a difference between conflict and confrontation, and not every confrontation has to be conflict. And so, what that means then is that I believe in real, honest engagement with one another. As far as in terms of conflict, when it does arise, when we can't help ourselves, where there is strongly held views in different directions, I'm a firm believer in deliberative dialogue. And actually, I really love deliberation because I think that becomes the means by which not only do we deal with conflict, but we can arrive at a resolution that that everyone feels ownership of. So what deliberative dialogue is really it's we come together saying and being intentional that we are going to have a deliberation. And that is a process by where we create a process where everyone gets an opportunity to express. We let everyone feel heard and engaged, empowered, inspired. It's not a debate. It's not a presentation. It's not an attempt to reach a unanimous agreement. It's not the goal is not to convince someone of the rightness or wrongness of a particular position. What it does is we say we want to get together and begin to hear what our feelings are, what we want, what we are afraid of, what we are afraid of losing, what we are afraid, what I'm going to miss, or what I'm scared about, what's giving me anxiety, holding it together, trusting each other. And then, and even before that, we start off with our values. We start off, and Plymouth, I know, I've heard it from every one of you that I've talked to. I've heard about covenant. Well, if you lead with covenant, that is already an expression of an intention that we're going to bind ourselves together. And so that's one of the values we start with. How do we bind ourselves together to have a conversation? Things like neighborliness. One of mine is beloved community. How do we continue to try to uphold beloved community even when we disagree? Even when we disagree in politics, how do we have this value that we're going to stick together? And then if we do that, if we are so careful in our deliberation, we come together, I think we then start to trust each other. And believe me, as someone who's been with his partner for 29 years, trust is always being established over and over again, so that we know that the next move is going to be together. We know that the next move is going to be, so that when we get to the ultimate decision that we have to make, even if I don't get what I want, even if you don't get what you want, because we've had the chance to be heard, we've covenanted to bind ourselves together. We've kept the focus on our traditions and our practices that give us a common language and a common identity, and we know who we are together, even as we know who we are apart. Then when we get to that ultimate decision, we'll know that we arrived at it with integrity and with our values intact. And even if I didn't get what I want, I trust and believe and love in the people who held me, who understood what I was afraid I was going to lose, who could sort of hold on to me and help me grieve because I didn't get what I want or I lost what I held dear. But then because they held me, I could keep my eye open for what new connection I gained, what new value was imparted, what new gift came out of it. That's how I deal with conflict. And if you're saying to yourself, DeWayne, that sounds real lofty, that's because I began with the idea and the imagination that I'm going to trust you in this. And that's the only way that I can then tell you, here's what I'm losing, and I don't want to lose it. And then I can trust that you will hear me and help me figure out how to be whole again. One of the worst things that ends up happening, I was with the Episcopal Church when we had the big sexuality fight over the ordination of Gene Robinson, a gay man, as bishop. And while there were some people who could not stay, the reason that wasn't a bigger schism, and people were looking for it, the reason that wasn't a bigger one, because in the end, what the Episcopal Church did was they kept the Eucharist front and center. And after every deliberation, everyone knew that they were going to hold hands and they were going to go to that table and they were going to take the bread and the cup as one. And so when it was all said and done, the schism was not nearly as large as some predicted. And the Episcopal Church marched into a healthier understanding of what its witness was going to be. There were some who lost something in that, but there were some who also found their way. And that's what I want from any kind of conflict.
Thank you, DeWayne. Right. Longer question here. Throughout these years, Plymouth has played a leadership role in impacting homelessness in the Twin Cities area. And as you probably know, Beacon Interfaith Housing Collaborative was started by Plymouth Congregational Church. Are you committed to addressing this issue and supporting Plymouth's ongoing role in making a significant difference in ensuring that everyone has a home?
Well, I don't know who gave that question, but I wonder if you all put the fix in for me. Certainly. Actually, one of the first events that I did as pastor of All God's Children, probably within 2 months, was going to one of Beacon's clergy gathering to talk about their next project. That was in 2013. I was one of the first ones that I attended. One of my public policy focuses was on housing. I worked closely. I worked for those who don't know, just get a bit more specific with you. I worked for 3 members of Congress, and all 3 of them were appropriators. And the Appropriations Committee are the ones, the federal government, who funds federal programs. And in all of my capacity, I was working on appropriations. One of my areas was housing. And so I worked closely with organizations like Beacon across the United States, but certainly in the states of Maryland, Texas, and Indiana, because those were members that I worked with, worked on the appropriations for housing and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And so a lot of the work I did was on the National Housing Trust Fund and the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, some of the programs that Beacon takes advantage of, and some of the work that it does. So yes, I'm very much committed to that work. And just to let you also know that I am on the board of directors of Clare Housing. which provides housing for those who are infected by HIV, and that certainly have challenges with not only getting housing, but also who may have a problem with addiction. And not only do I work very closely with Clare Housing on some of the public policies around affordable housing and public housing, one of the things that I continue to do in that capacity as a board member is to make sure that when Clare takes on the responsibility of development, Clare is also a developer building apartment buildings. One of the things that's in my fiduciary responsibility as a board member is always sort of making sure that Clare is partnering and figuring out those non-traditional outlets for housing. So I am very much committed to that. But I want to expand that a little bit, especially someone asked the question about climate change and environmental justice. This just want to forecast for you. This is where I think Plymouth really is uniquely situated to begin to be on the vanguard of inspiring more action. Beacon is an example of that. It was an idea, a germination of an idea that got institutionalized to the point that it becomes a part of how people talk about housing. Well, I think that we have the ability to leverage our influence and our interest to do that with a range of issues, including climate change and environmental justice. This also gets back to what I mean by imagination. I don't ever want to forestall our ability to imagine. And here's why. This is significant because it does relate to this. Because what's going to happen, it happens all the time. When in my experience, and it's very frustrating for me, in my experience working in government, whenever there was the idea of giving tax cuts or giving some credits, some kinds of tax credits and some favorable treatment to large corporations, whenever there was a plan to build something, something for the military or something like that, there was never a question about cost. There was never any thought about anything about how challenging it would be. But as soon as we start talking about issues that directly affect our lived experience, somehow people start talking about how much it costs. And as soon as you start talking about how much something costs, our imagination suffers. As soon as someone says it's going to be this, our imagination just closes off. And I don't ever want us to lose our imagination. I don't ever want Plymouth to assume that it has arrived. I'm reading Howard Kahn's book, Hands Above My Shoulders, and pastor of Plymouth, and he talked about the dangers of being so successful, and he was talking about Plymouth. And one of the things that Howard Kahn was concerned about is that Plymouth, not his words, but my words, would lose its imagination because it had arrived, because it had accomplished so much. And that really stuck with me when I was reading his book. At a time that a very different time from our own. But that even he would think to worry that we always run the risk of losing our fight in our imagination because we've accomplished so much. And so Beacon is a success, but I hope it's an inspiration for us to keep it up. I hope it's an inspiration for us to imagine what more can be done. Not because we have all the answers, but because we can have an impact.
Thank you, DeWayne. Quick reminder for people too, if there is a chat bar at the bottom that it's somewhat hidden, so you can click on that if you want to put in additional questions into the group chat. DeWayne, here's a question about music. Plymouth's current music program is predominantly rooted in the classical tradition, although we do have jazz at our early service. What are your thoughts on the part music plays in worship, and what ideas do you have on the future of music at Plymouth?
So I'll answer that first part. Well, I'll answer the second part first. So I don't particularly have an idea about the future of music. That question is strange to me, mainly because one of the things that my idea is that music will find its way. And I love collaborating with musicians and directors of music to imagine and to think about it. But I think I can answer that second question by answering that first. Music. Okay. You know, sometimes I think it's obvious how important music is to me, but I guess it isn't. But music. Music is a means, especially in the sacred tradition. But see, this is the thing. See, I grew up in a house where they told you that the only music that mattered was sacred music. And when I left the church, I learned very early by experience, like, oh, how can you separate the two? There's no such thing. Music. So what I mean by that is music provides both a means for revelation and response. And revelation in the sacred tradition, what that means is I think that God seeks to be disclosed, and it can be, and God and the God of your understanding can be discerned in music. But at the same time, it doesn't really matter. Music is a means for revelation. If it's quote secular, then I think it's a means for truth and beauty. And emotions of varying kinds. So the idea of music as revelation is a means for revelation. I don't know how worship can happen without it in some form. It almost matters little what style to me. Because I think it is a means for revelation writ large. And that you can't separate it, and that's so powerful to me, because I've long since given up the conceit that anybody will probably listen to my preaching, and so if my voice just becomes so annoying that you tune me out, I'm trusting that the music might be the sermon for you that day. And I hope that it is, because if I didn't get you, then maybe Philip Brunel will. But anyway, I also think it's response. And so what that means then is, certainly it's obvious that if the music is, you bop your head, you stomp your feet, you know, but that response can also be touching you at the place where meaning is made, where testimony and prayer are those silent utterances that usher from the very depths of your being. And I know music can do that. I know it can do it. I have had that experience all the time where the words simply have not been formed. And in my attempt to do it, I simply cannot give voice to what I'm feeling or what I'm trying to say. And music has given that response. I was at the vigil for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and some members of the symphony orchestra were playing. And I was sitting next to one of my colleagues while they were playing, and we were going to be the next up to speak. Both she and I were going to be the next up to speak. And we were both really kind of nervous because the music arrested us so. And we felt like any response would be illegitimate in light of what we had done. But it was a response indeed. And her response was tears. My response was with my mouth agape. She laughed and said, close your mouth. So music is the means for that. And here's where I talk to liturgists and people in worship. While I love music and I love performance, one of the things that I always caution us is that performance should not overwhelm the message. Performance should not interfere with the connective movement that helps listeners make meaning and find their response. It should be a partner with the worshiper in finding that. And so while we can do many things in worship and why we're so good at music, I want us to always be mindful that we are partners. And so while we are performing, we are also inviting listeners to be a part of it. And so we got to always be mindful of it. Finally, the reason I know, I think I know that I'm on firm ground here about music being a means for revelation and response. I think it was a couple of months ago, my husband really wanted to see Beyonce's sort of music extravaganza on Disney Plus called Black is King. And I didn't have any particular interest in watching it, and I'm not a consumer of hip hop, and so I don't usually go there. And so, but I wanted to be with my husband and watch this show. And I was overwhelmed with emotion. It completely just placed me in a place that I did not know I wanted to go or needed to go. It touched some things in me that I didn't know I was contemplating. That I didn't know I needed to think about. And that's when I said to myself, boy, not only is she just an amazingly talented woman, but that she truly understands the power of music. You've heard it said that music and singing and all that is universal. If that is a cliche or if that is a well-worn aphorism, me watching that, watching Beyonce do that video extravaganza thing she did, really spoke to that part of me. And you can tell it's because I don't think I've heard anything from it again, but I still am thinking about that experience and how it really sort of touched some things in me. And I almost didn't want to do it. I almost didn't want to sit there and watch it. And because I did, I had an experience, and it's something that I take with me.
All right, DeWayne, thank you. I have one last question, and there'll be a brief closing right after that, so just everyone's aware of that as well. So here's your final question. You were drawn to Plymouth in part because of the potential you see here for you to have greater impact. What is your hope for how we together can make a difference in this community and world?
I'm not gonna mince words here. I believe Plymouth has the capacity, and I would like to see Plymouth be on the vanguard of justice work and justice witness. That what I have been lamenting since the days when I was in politics, is that the language of faith has been so compromised, such that the media looks at it as just one interest among many, and politics look at it as a potential group to be mined for power. And what has happened in that turn of events is that the question for me is who's expressing a public theology that gives the world pause and say, step back and think about bigger questions of justice. What faith? There are a lot of groups doing it. There are a lot of, but what are we saying? And so I want Plymouth to leverage, which it has done, by the way, in many ways, to leverage its own power and influence to be a partner, a real partner in justice work, so that when you think about it, when you think about Beacon, when you think about Vocal Essence, Plymouth is not too far away from people's thoughts. And if people don't know it, they'll know the connection pretty soon. Well, I want that to be the case with a range of ways that we talk. But I also want that to be an impetus for action. I aspire for Plymouth to be not only the vanguard of sort of public theology, but also an intentional creation of programs. You've done it before. The intentional creation of programs that address the material needs of people in poverty, that address real critical human needs. And there are a lot of things in that. Someone also talked about climate change and environmental justice. These are real, tangible things. And so, how do we, again, how do we imagine, what do we say, like what's possible? And really sort of be a part of an ongoing, active, intentional creation of ways by which we live that out so that people feel. I also want, I want us to be the creators of a renewed interest in the language and practices and exploration of about the common good. The reason I talked earlier about worship and sacramental adoration distracting us, we become such an individualistic community that the idea of a common good is kind of a strange thing for us to think about. How do we bind ourselves not just together as people of Plymouth, but how do we bind ourselves with the people in the community around us? How do we commit ourselves to a common purpose that says, I'm going to look out for you, and you're going to look out for me. I know some people don't think that's the way it does, but I'm a firm believer that it does. Example of that in All God's Children, one of the things that I said when I got there was that I want us to get outside of the four walls. We're safe here. But what about the people who aren't safe on the outside of the walls? And so we went on a concerted effort to reach out and to be connected. And sometimes that doesn't look, you can't see it. You can't see what's happening. But when the uprising happened and the looting and the fire came, All God's Children is a block away from where some of the destruction was happening. And I was wrestling with whether or not I should go to the church and camp out and protect the church. And board members and people said, no, you shouldn't do that. That's too dangerous. Don't do it, Pastor. And I was sitting there and worried. And then word got back to me from the facility director that the neighbors themselves had gotten out there and surrounded the church and was watching the church and said, you don't have to worry about it because we're going to do it for you. And that's what I mean about a common good, where we understand that we are bound together such that when we need people to step up, they did. And we didn't know. The only thing that we had done was committed ourselves to being in relationship with our community. And when we had made that commitment, what happened was that they had committed to be in relationship with us too. And what a blessing that was. And that's a common good that I hope that we can revive, that it's unfashionable, it's not sexy language. But it is the kind of hope that I have for us. Now, I know there's a lot of specific things I need to learn. I know some people want to hear some specific things. I have a lot of ideas. I've been living with your growth initiative, and there are some things that I've been looking at that, and I just been really excited. And some I want to try. I want to work with the growth team and figure out how we can do it. But those are the top things because I think those things fit, and we could really start seeing some real good stuff come out of it. So I know I went long, but I just wanted to give you some of that top stuff that I've been really wrestling with and thinking about. And I've just been so excited to read Howard Kahn's book and some other, just looking at what's been going on in this community for so long, and how you know, Plymouth, you are in trouble, because your history has imposed upon you the burden of doing this work. You can't get away from it, and you can't shrink from it. So I don't care how much you try. You are who and what you are. And so that's the beauty of what you have and what I want to leverage.
Wayne, thank you so much. And as we kind of wrap up here, thank you everybody for joining us. I have a couple of things to say before we send people off here. First of all, make sure that you connect to the website if you want to come on Saturday and visit with DeWayne and get a registration time and come. Again, that information is on the website. Also, DeWayne will be preaching on Sunday as well. So keep that in mind as well as to where you're going to be or where you're going to be viewing on Sunday. One last thing, DeWayne, before I kind of send you off and let you go, I'm going to give everybody the opportunity to unmute yourself and say goodbye to DeWayne. And DeWayne, at your own leisure, you can slowly send off as people want to say something to you. And thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate all the your willingness to be open and upfront